Hello and welcome to today's very special webinar, the HSE cyber attack 1 year on. May 14th, 2022 marks the first year anniversary of the HSE attack, the largest cyber attack in the history of the state. The HSE estimate the cost of the attack could be well over €100 million. The attack, known as the Conti ransomware attack, severely disrupted our health services, computer systems and data and demanded a ransom for its return, which went unpaid. The attack highlights the devastation that a cyber attack can cause, and in today's webinar, our panel of cybersecurity experts will deep dive into the attack, discuss what it means for the state, society and business at large. By the end of this session, you will have a better idea of the learnings from the attack and how you can apply them to your organisation. So, to introduce our speakers today, firstly, we have David McNamara, CEO here at ComSec. David has a long and distinguished career in cyber and information security, working with the likes of Fujitsu, IBM, Siemens and Air. He also has a background in the Defence Forces. Also joining us on the panel is Colm Gallagher, Digital Forensics Director at ComSec. Colm's experience and skills include digital forensics and cybercrime investigations. And finally, last but by no means least, is Ian Shield. Ian is Operations Director at ComSec, and his background includes business and information security in management and consulting roles. Here is a quick look at today's agenda. David is kicking off the session by giving us an overview of the key points of the HSE attack. Then Colm is going to give us an insight into the timeline and into the Conti gang in themselves. And finally, Ian will illustrate what learnings we can take from all of this. So without further ado, I'll pass you over to David.
Hello everyone, thanks for coming on. So just maybe to start off with the HSE attack, it wasn't about a blame game that the HSE were at fault. They were actually victims of a cybercrime. And what this did for cybersecurity awareness was raise it considerably. This became so high profile, it raised awareness that this could happen to any business. So protecting your brand and reputation is critical to most businesses, and having an effective communication plan is really key to any organization, particularly when dealing with media, which the HSE did very well. Some of the things they probably could have done better was active monitoring, which would have greatly reduced the risk of this type of attack, and having trained, experienced cybersecurity experts in-house would have been a huge advantage to the HSE in actually spotting this attack at the very outset. So there are huge costs and complexity when an attack of this nature does occur. So having an incident response plan is crucial to every organization. So one of the first things of lessons learned was actually having that effectively put in place. And this also creates huge additional pressure on IT departments. So as well as trying to respond to the incident and getting services back up and running, IT departments become under pressure from all different aspects of the services that they're trying to service. So the pressure on IT departments is absolutely phenomenal when this type of attack occurs. So again, having people who are trained with actually dealing with the nature of attack and doing the incident response is absolutely crucial. That said, I'll hand over to our next speaker, Colm.
Thank you, David. As we can see from this timeline, which came from the PwC report issued in December 21, the initial infection of the HSE systems took place on the 18th of March 21. And for the next couple of months, the attackers pivoted around inside the network until they, on the 14th of May 21, deployed the ransomware. That couple of months where they were in the systems could have provided an opportunity for detection, but unfortunately in this case that didn't happen. Subsequent to the deployment of the ransomware, in a very odd move, the attackers released a decryption key without receiving payment. That normally does not happen at all. And as you can see from the timeline, then it took months to get to a point where 99% or so of applications had been restored, and we're still not to this day fully recovered, and probably never will be. So the group behind the attack was very quickly identified as the Conti crime group, who were based in the Russian Federation. It was known pretty much straight away. They weren't keeping it a secret. They opened up negotiations in an attempt to get money and identified themselves. And they're a group that have been around in their current form since 2020 or so, even to the point where they have their own Wikipedia page. So they're quite a well-known group in cybersecurity circles. And in a very strange example of the law of unintended consequences, subsequent to their attack in a special military operation against Ukraine, which, as I say here, was definitely not a war or an invasion, they came out on the side of the Russian government very publicly. And that wouldn't be a problem, except for within their group, which spanned a number of Russian-speaking countries, there was at least one Ukrainian member who was not best pleased at that stance, and took the opportunity 4 days after the special military operation began to release their internal communications, their source code, their Bitcoin addresses, and a whole treasure trove of interesting information. And that gives us a massive insight into how an organization like this actually functions on a day-to-day basis. So what do we learn from the leaks that came out of that particular episode? We learned that it runs like a normal business, like pretty much about the same scale as your normal startup. They have offices, they have electricity bills, they've got comms bills, they've got equipment, functioning HR department, they have a call center which deals with victims, but also handles negotiations where somebody is trying to maybe reduce the price of getting the key. They actually pay salaries and keep accounts of that. Very, very obvious from the chats is that whether or not it's true, they actually believe that they're working indirectly for the FSB in Moscow, and they take comfort from that in that it means that they don't share the fate of other groups who have been arrested by the FSB for hacking operations. Part of that reason for that may be that they do take on patriotic tasks. They will accept tasks coming from the FSB or from people that they believe to be working for the FSB. They do not sully their own doorstep. They don't attack any Russian or Chinese organizations at all. And one very, very telling piece of information that came out of the leaks is that they do get informed when, for example, the FBI make an inquiry in relation to some of their operations to law enforcement in Russia. They are kept informed of that. So I think we can safely say if it walks like a duck and talks like a duck, etc., they are pretty much an arm of the Russian Federation. Brings us to why did they give up the decryption key so easily? Well, you can see that from the chart on the right hand side there, healthcare is not a big target for them. Primarily they go after services and manufacturing, and then retail after that. Those would be the primary areas in which they operate. The chats do reveal that they had a no hitting healthcare organizations policy. They weren't all clear on that. The question did have to be asked, and it was answered that yes, we do not hit healthcare organizations. But you can see from the chart that even so, 4% of their targets were healthcare. So not all operatives seem to be up on the policy, and indeed one of them was sacked for breaching that policy. Again, revealed in the chats. And the reason they probably give up the key was that hitting a healthcare organization during a global pandemic brings a lot of attention, and the links between them and the Russian government makes that very, very unwelcome attention indeed, in that they would not want anybody shining a light into that area. So the release of the key without payment was in all likelihood an attempt to deflect that attention away as quickly as possible. And with that, I'll hand you over to Mr. Ian Shield.
Thanks, Colin. Okay, as Colin has said, PwC were commissioned to investigate and report on the HSE attack. The report that they produced identified many issues, some of which included bad practices and missed opportunities to detect the compromise and potentially to prevent the attack happening at all. Now, there's no reason to think that the issues they found could only happen in a large public sector organisation like the HSE. Their findings have some key learnings the private sector and SMEs in general could do well to pay attention to. The first of these is that investment in cyber security is a business survival imperative. The report stated that a low level of cybersecurity maturity, including critical issues with cyber security capability, has persisted for years with little progress. Critical cybersecurity exposure is a serious business risk and therefore a board level issue, not just a problem for IT alone. Many organizations are not adequately prepared to detect, respond to, or recover from a ransomware or other cybersecurity attack. All of this increases pressure on supply chain security for vendors arising from the national response, which is known as the Public Sector Cybersecurity Baseline Standards. The National Cybersecurity Strategy between 2019 and 2024 stated that the National Cybersecurity Centre, in conjunction with the Office of the Government Chief Information Officer, would formulate a cybersecurity baseline standard for government ICT to be phased in across all public sector bodies. Prior to the HSE attack, a steering group had been working on the project to develop the baseline standard, which was published in November 2021 by the Department of the Environment, Climate and Communications, and was called the Public Sector Cybersecurity Baseline Standards. Okay, some information about that. The baseline provides the mandatory protective security outcomes that all public service bodies are required to achieve. It defines the security measures to be implemented by public service bodies to improve ICT resilience and security, and it's based on a framework published by the USA's National Institute of Standards and Technology, also known as NIST, for improving the security of critical infrastructure. The NIST framework itself references many other international standards and publications, such as ISO 27001, the ISO 31000 risk management standards, and another standard called COBIT. It's very wide-ranging as it applies to all public service bodies, and some examples of public service bodies include, but is not limited to, government departments, government agencies, universities, institutes of technologies, the HSE, public hospitals, and county and city councils. As public service bodies begin to comply with the baseline standard, they will require assurance and evidence that their ICT suppliers will also implement and use good cybersecurity practices. So ICT suppliers will also be affected. There are two main reasons why the baseline standard was published. The first was it was to fulfill the commitment made in the National Cybersecurity Strategy that I've already mentioned. And secondly, it is to facilitate early alignment with the NIS2 directive. The NIS directive itself, which is the first one, is an EU directive which was signed into Irish law in 2019. And it's a set of mandatory guidelines for operators of essential services such as power, gas distribution, water supply, health, transport, and banking. And NIS2, the next version, extends the scope of the existing directive to many other sectors and organisations, including the public administration. There are no deadlines or timelines for implementation in the baseline standard document, but compliance to the framework is mandatory for all public sector bodies. The baseline is expected to be updated every 12 to 18 months. As I've mentioned, the public sector's cybersecurity baseline standards are based on the NIST framework, which in turn references ISO 27001 and other standards. ISO 27001 is an international standard for creating an information security management system and sets out requirements which can be independently audited and certified. The NIST framework was created to help US federal agencies and organizations better manage their risk. NIST, unlike ISO, does not provide a certification process. It's a framework to assist organizations to improve their cybersecurity maturity. The reality of this is that adoption, we saw before, just going back to the last slide, that there's quite a lot involved in both ISO 27001 and in NIST. The adoption of the framework or certification to ISO is not a trivial exercise. Both require a good risk management and treatment foundation, and most SMEs will find that they need some sort of external assistance. However, when an SME decides whether they want to align with NIST or to certify to ISO 27001 or not, there are some basic cybersecurity practices that should be got right. We would encourage people to start with the fundamentals. Firstly, internet firewalls should be in place and be properly configured to prevent access unless it is specifically allowed. PCs and other devices should be secured, default passwords changed, etc. For user accounts control, users should only have access to the resources and to the data that they need to perform their role and no more. That's a concept known in the trade as minimum privilege. Malware protection, or otherwise known as antivirus, should be from a reputable provider, should be kept up to date and ideally centrally managed. Software patching means that operating systems and device firmware should be kept up to date and updated for the latest security issues and threats. And the last point, security backups, or secure backups, I should say, as well as being regularly tested, backups need to be secure to prevent them from being encrypted or wiped by ransomware or other malware. And when we saw in the case of the HSE, the attackers were in the network for some 57 days before they launched a ransomware attack. Often, attackers will target backups to prevent them from being restored and make the victim more reliant on paying for the ransomware keys to get their data back. Hence, it's vitally important that backups are secure, they cannot be tampered with, and are regularly tested. Once organizations have the fundamentals in place, we would suggest the following. Have an information asset register of hardware, software, and data. You can't protect what you don't know you have, and you certainly can't recover it if you don't. A business impact analysis will tell you that what you should prioritize by identifying your most important systems and the assets that the business cannot continue to function without. Risk management is about identifying, scoring, and treating your risks. Active monitoring is something that David mentioned earlier. Active monitoring refers to gathering your security logs centrally and monitoring them for unusual behavior. There were several missed opportunities to detect the compromise and stop the attack that were missed in the HSE. Again, as David has said, fully rehearsed and practiced incident response and business continuity plans are crucial. They will save time and vastly improve your ability to recover quickly when something adverse does happen. And finally, but by no means least, penetration testing and vulnerability scans are important to ensure that your systems and your applications are secure, up to date from a security perspective, and that they remain so. And that's it. Now, I'll put you back to Dara to wrap up.
Thank you, Ian. I'd like to say a big thank you to our panel, David, Colm and Ian, for giving us a great insight into the HSE attack and the learnings that can be applied to most businesses and to organizations. If you'd like to speak to our team about improving your cyber or IT security, then please get in touch via our website at comsec.ie or email us at info@comsec.ie to arrange an initial chat. See you on the next webinar. Thank you.